think I'm going to go ahead and welcome everybody today to the Beringia Center Science Talks. And of course, we are really happy to be back for another season after taking a break this summer. And you'll learn a bit of why we take breaks in the summer during our talk today. But we are looking forward to another season where we can share all sorts of archaeology, paleontology, Beringia related science, and beyond with everybody. So while we gather today online from various locations, we do want to respectfully acknowledge that the Yukon Beringia Interpretive Center is located within the traditional territories of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Tonquachin Council. We respectfully acknowledge the history, customs, and cultures of all Yukon First Nations for whom these lands are an ancestral home, as well as Indigenous peoples throughout the Americas with roots in Beringia. My name is Christy, and I'm the manager here at the Beringia Center. And today I will be moderating the talk, and I am very excited to also be joined by my colleague Claire, who's helping out behind the scenes. And of course, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, we love to get them. So please add them in the comments and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And also, we are joined by our two colleagues, both Holly Smith and Michael Grooms. And they are going to provide an awesome update from Yukon Archaeology to tell us about how things went during the 2023 field season. So before we jump into that, I'll give you a little bit of background on both of our speakers. So Holly began her career in 2009 in Ontario after completing her undergraduate degree in archaeology and cultural anthropology at Wilfrid Laurier University. And then on a whim, she relocated to the Yukon in 2011 and continued consulting work before returning to school to complete her master's degree at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. And I think that's when I met Holly, is when she was partway through with that master's degree at the University of Alaska. So Holly's been with our Yukon Government Archaeology Program since 2018 as a Development Assessment Archaeologist. And her research interests include human-environmental interaction, faunal analysis, raw material sourcing, and landscape use. So welcome, Holly. We look forward to what you guys have to say. And I will introduce Michael now. So Michael has been practicing archaeology in the Yukon since 2010, primarily at the Littlejohn site in the Yukon borderlands. And he is also currently a Yukon Government Development Assessment Archaeologist. Michael completed his MA in 2010 at the University of New Mexico, reassessing artifact provenience at the Healy Lake Village site in Alaska. Since then, Michael has worked in academia and cultural resource management, focusing on organic artifacts found at Alaskan ice patches, as well as geoarchaeology. His research interests include collaborative archaeology, geological dating methods applied to archaeological sites, and sediment and soil analysis to help contextualize complex archaeological sites. So welcome, Michael, and welcome again, Holly. We're really looking forward to what you guys have to share with us. So why don't we just jump right in? I'll let you share your screen and take over from here.
Sure, let me get this set up here. All right, is that showing up correctly? Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Christy and Claire, in the background. It's great to be part of these Beringia Center Science Talks. There's a lot of work that goes on the Yukon, and these science talks are always a great way to communicate all the research that we've done and then other researchers have done in the Yukon. So we're happy to be here and excited to talk about our field season. So Yukon Government Archaeologists have participated in field projects across the Yukon, ranging from assessing actively eroding heritage sites on the North Slope and Herschel Island Territorial Park to sites related to the earliest evidence of humans in Yukon during the last glacial maximum, and even the unique organic artifacts associated with hunting technology recovered from the Yukon Ice Patch Project. The stars you see on the map here represent the general locations where YG archaeologists conducted fieldwork this summer, and is a representation of fieldwork that all 5 archaeologists here at the branch have done, and our STEP student this year, Annie Lee. These archaeologists here include Ty Hefner, Yukon archaeologist, Christian Thomas, special projects archaeologist, and then the 3 development assessment archaeologists is Jody McMillan, Holly Smith, and myself. This work that we've conducted and we conduct every year can be completed without support from Yukon First Nation heritage departments and citizens. So I've highlighted here on the left just a few of the projects that we're going to be talking about today. We'll start within the far north on Herschel Island and talk a little bit about North Slope work. Then we'll go down to a little further south, the Bluefish Caves and some of the other work we've done in the area. We'll talk about the continuing Ice Patch project, and then development field projects that our office has done. And then we'll end with a discussion of a really kind of unique and cool culmination of a lot of hard work on some First Nation co-managed heritage sites that culminated in the Klondike UNESCO World Heritage Site nomination acceptance. But like I said, we'll start in the far north here. So we'll start in Herschel Island, the area called Chii Ch'à'an. It's a location for Inuvialuit traditional use for the past millennia, but it was also the location of a post-contact whaling station around 1890. The archaeological record includes multiple house structures representing Inuvialuit occupations, as well as buildings associated with the whaling station. These heritage sites have been the focus of risk management and mitigation studies within the past 5 years. Because of the quickly eroding shoreline that's the result of climate change driven rising sea levels that may eventually erase these important heritage resources. Field work at Chii Ch'à'an on Herschel Island was spurred on in 2018 when it was noted that erosion from the rising sea levels was encroaching on known Inuvialuit sod houses east of the Mission House. Here you can see Mission House, and so these excavations of sod houses were kind of happening over here. As a result of these studies, the University of Calgary, led by Dr. Peter Dawson and graduate student Caitlin O'Keefe, initiated a change detection study to monitor the shoreline erosion and to help plan mitigative measures for the heritage sites that are now at risk. Fieldwork for this project began in 2022 when the island reopened after the pandemic shutdowns. The University of Calgary, in conjunction with Inuvialuit and YG Archaeology, utilized drones and 3D technology to capture measuring the coastline loss, as well as capturing 3D images of the post-contact structures from the whaling station. They also began site mitigation of the endangered sod houses. The results of the project can be viewed at it's a really cool website. It's at herschel.preserve.ucalgary.ca. And if you go to that website, you'll see detailed 3D renderings of the post-contact structures and shoreline erosion over the years, and learn a little bit more about the background and history and use of the area. You know that Herschel Island is so far north, a lot of us are never able to go all the way up there. So this website's a really the next best way to go up there, but you can explore Herschel Island from the comfort of your chair. So our special projects archaeologist, Christian Thomas, seen here, covered in mud and clay and maybe some cooking grease. And he looks happy in this picture. We'll have to see about that. Is screening mud and sands during one of the sod house excavations this year. He was joined by Alyssa Meager from the Yukon Paleontology and 2 Inuvialuit citizens. In 2023, Christian continued excavations of one sod house excavated. He started excavating in 2022 and began excavations of another sod house in the vicinity. As part of this project, they did continue to use drones and to measure the shoreline erosion. In previous Beringia Center Science talks, Chris has kind of gone into a lot more detail about the methods and the amount of coast that's been lost over the past few years. So today I'll briefly touch on that, but I really want to kind of talk more about his excavations he conducted this year. Here in the bottom right, you can see two of the Nuvialawit citizens happily screening some sediments. So in the past 10 years, there's been at least 42 meters of loss of the shoreline. And between 2019 and 2021, there's been 28 meters of loss. As you can tell, this is a pretty rapidly degrading shoreline. And so recording and mitigating these known heritage sites is, even more important. So these are the two areas where Christian has been excavating this year. So there's the mission house and the two sod houses. There's the 2022 excavation location of one sod house. And then he started excavations of a sod house located over here. So this is a picture of before he began excavating this year. Kind of in the foreground, you can see tarps and stakes where their excavations ended last year. And then in the background here is the location of the sod house they began excavating this year. These sod houses are normally visible on the beach or on services by grass growth kind of on the perimeter of these sod houses. So these are the results of his excavations from this year on the second sod house, either by luck or great experience. He was able to put this excavation unit right at the corner of one of these sod houses. They were able to uncover two walls. You see one wall here and a second wall here, as well as an entryway, a fireplace, and a sleeping platform. During the excavations, they encountered plenty of animal remains, but not a whole lot of artifacts were recovered from this level during the excavations. Some of the artifacts they did recover were around the entrance. It's kind of an area where people would discard things that were broken or trash. And these are two stone ulu fragments that were found near the entrance to this sod house. After he uncovered the floor of that sod house, he began excavating the floor of the sod house he began excavating in 2022. Here you can see him clearing off about 2 to 3 feet of beachhead sand deposits that have been come in the past year. And they didn't continue excavating beyond the floor last year because they were informed by the University of Calgary that there would likely be a lot more artifacts associated with the floor and underneath the floor. And they wanted more Nuvialawit participants to be part of those excavations. So you can see here them clearing off the area, and then when they did begin excavations, they did find the artifacts that they were predicted to find. So this is just a sample of the artifacts they recovered this year. In this top right corner, you can see some exotic beads, a stone bead. You can see possibly an HBC related trade item, maybe through indirect trading through the Gwich'in that was recovered on the floor of the sod house. Down here, you see a fishing lure. In the upper left, you can see some awls. And then down here is kind of a smattering of artifacts. There's maybe a whale pendant. These are pendants and fish hooks, maybe some artifacts associated with games as well. But some really neat organic artifacts preserved from this sod house. As part of, a North Slope shoreline erosion work and protecting these heritage resources up here, YG, in conjunction with the Nuvialawit and our Historic Sites Unit, are also monitoring and measuring coastline erosion along Yukon's North Slope. Here you can see Lee Whalen from our Historic Sites Unit doing some helicopter work and monitoring. This is an ongoing project where YG goes up there annually to do this work. The 2023 field work was kind of cut short due to poor weather for the helicopter flying time, and then also wildfire smoke limited the work, but they are planning on going up there next year to continue the work. And so that's kind of a summation of the far north work that YG completed this year. And so now I'll hand it over to Holly to talk about some of our projects a little further south.
Next slide. The Old Crow Research Roundup. This event actually happened back in February, so not officially part of our field season, but it is relevant for the next 2 field projects we'll be discussing. So I'm going to cover it a little bit here as well. The Wunderkichen government hosts what they call a research roundup in Old Crow, and invites any active researchers in the traditional territory to share their research plans and results with the residents of Old Crow. My coworker Jody, one of our research partners from the University of Kansas, Lauren, and one of our Yukon paleontologists, Elizabeth, and I all traveled to Old Crow for this event. It was a really great opportunity to talk about the results of our previous field season and talk about what our plans for this upcoming year were. It also gave the community a chance to ask some questions, provide input, and help guide our research objectives for the coming year. We hosted a table on archaeology and paleontology in the region throughout the day. Jody and I gave a presentation on last year's cave survey work, the regional survey we conducted in the area, doing some site monitoring visits, and the upcoming exploratory excavation project we were planning for the Chii Ch'à'an Cave, which I'll cover later on. Lauren Norman gave a presentation on the preliminary findings from the Bluefish Caves field excavation season in 2022 and talked about the projected work at the site in 2023. This event also gave the opportunity to travel to Old Crow in the depths of winter and connect with the community in a completely different way. By slowing down, sharing a few meals together, and talking over tea instead of the sometimes chaotic hello, goodbye, humdrum of field season. When we're in and out of town and constantly moving, this gave us a chance to really slow down and connect and ask questions and input with the community in a completely different light. So it was a really valuable experience and super interesting to go to Old Crow when it was -40, not +30. So that was pretty cool. Next slide. So the 2 projects we have going on in the Old Crow region is in 2 main areas. I sort of hinted at that already. Our research partners at the University of Kansas focused their continued work at Bluefish Caves, which is shown in the first picture there on the map. And we set up a new camp out at Chii Ch'à'an Cave, which is located in the vicinity of the fishing branch N'ingling Ngijik Territorial Park. And Wunderkichen is a partner with us on both of these projects and offers invaluable logistics, staffing, knowledge, background support, which is really, really helpful, especially when none of us are based in Old Crow. Particularly Megan Williams, who's actually a summer student with our coworker Ty way back in the day here at the Yukon Archaeology Program. So it's a fun connection that we have, and we're able to reconnect in different ways just way farther north. Next slide. So Bluefish Caves. This is a continuation of work by the University of Kansas that began back in 2019 and has had a few starts and stops of the pandemic. Ty, our head archaeologist for the government, spoke about the long history of this project starting in 1977 with Jacques St. Mars very succinctly in his 2022 Field Review Beringia Center Science talk. So I won't go into too many details here, but if you're interested, I highly encourage you check out the October 13th, 2022 talk here on Beringia's Facebook page. It has a lot of information about the history and then the new resurgence of revisiting the site in 2020. So in addition to that, there's also another whole science talk that Beringia hosted May 2022. So I'm really pumping some of these old talks to go back and watch, where a lot of the experts on Bluefish Caves talked about it and pointed out, the history of it, the new resurgence of revisiting the site. Just as a quick background, there's 4 cave shelter structures at Bluefish, and the first 3 were excavated back in the 1970s, 1980s, and Cave 4 was never excavated, and this group is now going back to do some excavations there. So in 2023, the work at Bluefish Caves was primarily focused on finishing these 2 excavation units at Cave 4 that they had begun back in 2022. And they hope to pull more samples for testing to do some work over the winter as well. And as with any remote fieldwork, it takes a lot of time and creative logistics to just get to site. Planning, shopping, packing, and then shipping equipment and people from Kansas to Whitehorse to Old Crow, demobilize everything to Bluefish Caves, which is about a 30-minute helicopter ride away, and then setting up camp all before actually doing any archaeological work. So it's quite a task that this crew has to do, but they don't do this work alone. The Yukon Government Archaeology staff and the Wendake Heritage staff support wherever they can, and they're very, very, very grateful for our support, and it's also very neat for us to be part of this project as well. So the excavations at Cave 4 took place over a 3-week time period. And this year they were particularly lucky because a cook from Old Crow came to site and took care of all of the food prep, planning, and cooking. So for the field crew, this was a true luxury because normally you're working all day and then you have to cook and do all these camp tasks. So this was a really, really big deal this year. And we heard a lot of rave reviews, particularly the homemade fudge that the cook made. We were pretty jealous that we didn't lock him down for our field project first. So maybe that'll be something we do in the future. But they had a very productive field project. I'm not at liberty to share any of the specific results. You'll have to keep an eye out for the University of Kansas crew to be doing talks, maybe here or somewhere else in the future, but they do plan on coming back next year to continue their work. So that's very exciting for all of us. Part of the funding we get for this project is through the Polar Continental Shelf Program through Natural Resources Canada. And a component of the project includes community involvement. So we do set aside a day near the end of the fieldwork to conduct some community visits out to site, which is photographed in the photo to your right there. And this gives about 20 of Wendake First Nation citizens the opportunity to visit Bluefish Caves via helicopter and get a tour of all the caves previously excavated and see the work being done at Cave 4. Ty and Lauren are able to answer questions on the history of the site and show off the work they've been doing throughout the project. It's exciting to see people arrive at the site, share stories about their connection to the site. Some of them actually visited way back in the 70s when the other caves were excavated, so that's a pretty cool connection. And chat about how awesome the view is, because it really is spectacular when you're seeing this huge height of land overlooking the huge valley. So it's a neat opportunity to connect with citizens outside of Old Crow. Next slide. Chii Ch'à'an Cave. During our cave survey last year, we pinpointed this cave as the best option for an excavation this year. It had promising sediment and development inside the cave, but mostly frozen about 10 to 20 centimeters down, but we had a plan for that. There was a decent location to host a field camp not far from the base of the camp in close proximity to water, or at least we thought. And there was a good geological and traditional knowledge background information that had been done by previous researchers. So there's a good baseline of knowledge already. During a previous geological cave mapping project, there was evidence of human modification of this cave, including a constructed low stone wall across an entrance corridor further into the back, and 5 spruce trees cached behind that wall. One was dated to about 700 years before present, and a streak of red paint at the entrance of the rear chamber, a circle of rocks, and a torch or a stick of spruce wood about 90 centimeters long that served as support for flammable material and showing signs of being carved. So we optimistically set out with a plan. We prepared and set up a new field camp, approximately 45-minute helicopter ride from Old Crow. There's a picture of our humble abode in the center of the slide. The creek near camp, which I'd say was raging in 2022 when we were there, was a mere trickle when we arrived. It was a pretty warm summer before we got there, and it slowly started drying up as the field days went on, which was slightly concerning. But after a few days of heavy rain, it did stay consistent for the duration of the project. So thankfully we did have water, so that it was a little hairy for one day, but we made it through. And during the planning, we had some staff overlap constraints. So we brought Greg Hare, who is a longtime Yukon government archaeologist. We brought him out of retirement to join the team, which was such a delight. And there's a picture of him on the slide there with our summer student, Annie. I have known Greg for years, but have never actually gotten a chance to excavate with him. So that was a personal treat. It was also hugely beneficial because Greg had done a lot of work in the area before and was actually part of some of the early cave survey mapping and had lots of knowledge and fun stories to share at camp. So that was really cool. And our crew also included Marvin Jr. from Old Crow, who was a great asset to the team. Also, side tip, we invested in a few thermocells, which were a huge camp hit. If anyone has ever questioned if they work or not, we can definitely attest to bug deterrent abilities in the old care area, which is usually really, really, really terrible. So big little side promo for there. I don't get any funding. Next slide. Now for the actual fieldwork results, the archaeology. Like I said, we knew we'd be encountering some frozen sediments inside the cave. So we brought with us a generator, lots of fuel, and these really fancy heated tarps. So you could set them up while we were gone for the night, turn them on, have them running, and come back to defrosted ground ready to excavate, or at least that was the plan. We set up a total station and began 4 1 by 1 meter units, or like a trench, kind of through the back center section of the cave. And after a short time, we hit some frozen sediments, kind of more clay. And after many cycles of using these heating tarps and excavating what we could, we finally hit a full ice lens at the bottom of the trench consistently. And it became pretty clear to the whole crew that further excavation would not be fruitful at this point. And you can see in the 2 bottom corners, there's that kind of ice, kind of tried to wash it off with a little bit of water, but it's just like a thick kind of clay and then ice everywhere, which was really interesting. We did further testing at the mouth of the cave and on the approach up the hill to the cave, but did not uncover any artifacts in either of these spots subsurface. It was a beautiful spot, and we still feel lucky to have gotten a chance to go and do this work. There's no regrets, but we will not be returning to do further work, unfortunately. After wrapping up this cave work, our coworker Ty conducted a few days of site revisits around the Old Crow area to monitor and track effects of climate change on archaeological sites in the north, and did the site visits of Bluefish Caves as well. So moving on from northern Yukon now to southern Yukon, I'll be chatting about the Ice Patch Project. So the Ice Patch research in the Yukon takes place within the traditional territory of 6 Yukon First Nations who have been working with us for almost the entirety of the project, which the first discovery was in 1997. Our coworker Christian Thomas manages this project on the YG end, and this summer he got to fly around in a helicopter with citizens from Kwanlin Dun First Nation, Champagne-Asiac First Nation, Teslin Tlingit Council, Ta'an Quechin, Carcross Tagish First Nation, and some of these groups also did helicopter days of their own. Next slide. First off, if you haven't heard us talking about Ice Patch Project before, you might be wondering what is an ice patch. This is a pretty good example with it's on side the mountain. They're basically accumulations of wind-drifted snow that dot the landscape in the southern Yukon. They're found on north-facing mountain slopes in the Alpine. And these accumulations were consistently building for thousands of years until more recently when the climate has been warming and the process of melting has begun. Now, why do archaeologists care about ice and snow accumulation on the mountains, you might ask? Next slide. Ice patches were hunting sites and to continue to be good hunting sites because caribou and sheep are drawn to these locations in warmer months to escape the bugs and the heat. Where caribou and sheep go, hunters will follow. And over thousands of years of successful hunting, projectiles were deposited over these ice patches and covered in snow and frozen in time. So typically archaeologists, we dig in the dirt and uncover very limited organic remains because the soils can be quite acidic and they degrade over time. So finding a projectile can happen, but rarely, if ever, do we uncover any wooden components of the tool. So we'll find often just the point, not the whole tool. Next slide. However, on these ice patches, we've been able to uncover partially and fully intact arrows and adlatals made of everything from wood, feather, antler, stone, copper, microblades, sinew, babiche, and a variety of wood types. 99% of the collection is hunting projectiles, but we have found other objects such as a moccasin and some other still unknown identified objects. So it's a pretty exciting project for us. The Yukon Ice Patch project displays a 9,000-year-old hunting tradition. And due to the excellent preservation at these frozen alpine hunting locations, we see some pretty remarkable artifacts melting. The collection really is an archaeologist's dream. No longer do we have to kind of imagine what a full hunting implement looks like. We can see the entire tool and marvel at the complexity and skill used to craft them. So we can also track the change and the evolution of these technologies over time, and do things like obsidian sourcing and pitch dating and all these different kind of cool things that we're discovering. So yeah, it's pretty cool project if you've never heard about it. Next slide. So the results from this year were pretty good, all things considered. According to Chris, there's still a backlog of snow in the mountains from last year's super high volume of snow, but summer heat has almost caught up. They are expecting substantial melt to be back next year. 2 years ago was one of the higher snow melt years, so this reprieve is kind of a welcome pause in order for them to catch up and collect all the things that melted out from previous years that they didn't quite get to. That didn't mean it was any less busy. So ice patch crews were able to visit about 25 sites with focused work on the Gladstone and Alligator ice patch, which are two of the larger. Highlighted finds include pieces of 7 different adlatals, some shown in situ at the bottom of your screen there, kind of in pieces, and a portion of a microblade slotted point, which is a photo of one of the field people coming out with us, Harmony, holding that. And these were both found at the massive Gladstone ice patch. And from a smaller, lower elevation ice patch, an arrowhead shown in the 2 photos on your top right, kind of one in place and one in the lab, was found in a stream, completely melted out of an ice patch. And you can see the years of water running erosion that has thinned the point a fair bit. There is a bit of degradation already, and you can tell why it's important we find these objects as soon as they melt out, because after a few years, some of these can completely disintegrate. So from long-term research projects, I'll pass this back to Michael for some of our development projects.
Thanks, Holly. So, a lot of the work that YG Archaeology does is related to permitting heritage impact assessment work across the Yukon, and even conducting some field work on Yukon government-driven land-altering projects. So all heritage resource impact assessments that are conducted in the Yukon require an archaeological site regulation permit, and those permits happen through our office. The bulk of heritage assessments that are conducted for industry are conducted by local heritage consultants. And in 2023, our office issued 46 archaeological site regulation permits, and that's the second most issued in a given year since the permitting began. YG Archaeology, in conjunction with First Nation heritage departments, conducted over 20 heritage assessments projects related to Yukon government-related land developments across the Yukon. Part of this work included revisiting and monitoring over 10 known archaeological sites. This fieldwork also resulted in the identification of more than 8 previously unrecorded archaeological sites. And this type of fieldwork generally involves pedestrian survey, shovel testing. We've been introducing drone survey in inaccessible areas. But we conduct this work to monitor and assess sites where land alteration is planned to take place. This next slide shows a few of the better pictures, scenic pictures from our development fieldwork this year. Annie Lee's up there, operating our boat pretty efficiently. And in the bottom there, you see an obsidian flake that was found at a newly recorded archaeological site in the Southern Lakes area. These artifacts are, they're all over the Yukon, but we archaeologists are not the only Yukoners who spend the summers in the far reaches of the territory. And chances are there are many Yukoners and visitors who encounter heritage resources during their outdoor activities. Heritage resources can range from historic mining equipment to cabins and structures, to pre-contact Yukon First Nation archaeological artifacts, chipstone points and chipstone tools, and even paleontological specimens. So we wanted to mention kind of this feather in the cap for the Yukon, called Yukon's Living Heritage marketing campaign. It's easily remembered as "Make a Find, Leave It Behind," which illustrates what people can do when they encounter a heritage site while they're working or recreating in the Yukon. The campaign is one of the products of Yukon's Heritage Working. We are proud that this program received a 2022 Canadian Governor's Award, and the website yukonlivingheritage.ca outlines the steps that the public and Yukoners and visitors can take to record, report, and report heritage sites when they come across them during their hiking or hunting or fishing trips. Next time somebody's out and about and you come across an artifact or a heritage resource, you can take a picture of it, make a quick description, record the location, but remember to leave it behind. And then when you're back in cell range or internet range, you can easily report the find on yukonlivingheritage.ca. So that's one feather in the cap that kind of happened this year. And Holly's going to talk about another achievement that was made by our hardworking YG staff in collaboration with the Trondheim Quichin and other heritage groups.
I'm back. Klondike on September 20th, after more than 10 years of work, Klondike was officially inscribed into the World Heritage List. This is Canada's 21st and Yukon's second UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is pretty exciting for us. Our co-worker Christian Thomas was part of this 10-year process and was in Dawson for the celebration of this inscription. Klondike is the first site in the UNESCO list inscribed from an Indigenous perspective, addressing the impacts of colonization. Klondike asks us to consider a different narrative of the Klondike and to re-envision the gold rush and the events between the end of the 19th century and the early years of the 20th century from the perspective of the Trondheim Quichin. Next slide. 8 sites were chosen as part of this World Heritage Site. So it's kind of a collection of sites, and they are listed on this slide. These have been significant resource and cultural areas for the Trondheim Quichin and just ancestors for thousands of years, and were fundamentally transformed during the colonial occupation of these lands. The Trondheim Quichin First Nation has been actively involved in the co-management of these sites for years, and this is an excellent example of collaboration and protection of heritage sites in the Yukon. From a personal perspective, I did my master's thesis on the archaeology of the 40 Mile site and can attest that this is a true partnership when working or visiting these sites. I felt very fortunate to be supported by both the archaeology program of YG and the heritage staff at TH when I did my excavations there. And 40 Mile continues to be one of my most favorite spots in the Yukon. So I'm pretty excited that other people think it's worth protecting as well. And I highly encourage, if you're up in the Yukon or up in Dawson, for a visit, or if you live here, to visit any of these sites and really experience the magic that is there. Next slide. Many locations included in this World Heritage Site are interesting because they show the earliest occupations of miners interacting directly with First Nations, with a clear line of historics on top of a lot of the archaeological artifacts. So this example from Trocheck shows a pit feature associated with a 1890s fish camp directly underneath a Klondike mine railway bed, which was constructed in 1905. So this distinct shift of artifacts from predominantly First Nation subsistence locales to gold rush mining infrastructure demonstrates the extreme and rapid socioeconomic change that occurred in this region at the time. And it's what makes the sites like Klondike such an important record and story to preserve and promote in this area. Next.
Yeah, so that's kind of a summation of all the work that Yukon Archaeology did this year. We do have additional work planned for next year. A lot of the continuing big projects that Yukon government and their partners are involved in are going to continue to happen in 2024. We're going to continue doing the Ice Patch project, and there are also plans with the University of Kansas and YG Archaeology and the VG to return to Bluefish Caves and continue excavations there, as well as monitoring sites in the northern Yukon that are at risk due to climate change. There's also plans to return to Herschel Island and the North Slope to monitor the erosion and at-risk heritage sites up there. And, you know, in general, our summers fill up very quickly with various heritage-related projects, as you can see all across the Yukon. So we are happy to talk about this today. Yeah, well, I think we can end it here and open this up for questions and comments.
All right, thanks, Michael, and thanks, Holly, for that great presentation. I think you held everybody's attention. It was great, and of course, I want to kick it off with the most important question that most archaeologists get asked. You guys might be able to guess, but what do each of you think was your or the team's most significant or your favorite find of the summer?
That's always
Yep.
a hard one because sometimes we don't actually find really cool things. Like it's always really, I find it always really exciting to hear what's coming out of the ice patches, just because it's such a cool project and they always find something groundbreaking almost every year. So I really love coming into the office the weeks after they fly for those, because it's nice to see what they find and what's new and different and what crazy things have happened there. So I like that, but that's not necessarily things that I find. It's things like our office has found. But one of the kind of the neat things about doing archaeology, I find sometimes isn't necessarily the artifacts you find, but the places you get to visit. And being in a place is sometimes just as breathtaking and full of learning as it is to actually find a thing. So I think being out at Chii Ch'à'an Cave, that was pretty exciting for me, just to try something new. You know, I wouldn't say we failed, but we didn't find anything super exciting, but it was kind of nice to like try and do this really big thing and get out to the spot and be in a really awesome location. And even though we didn't find something, there was something really, you could tell like people had used this, but maybe we just haven't found where or why. Like we haven't gotten there yet, but there's such a rich culture in that area and such a neat experience that there was something that like kind of just made you feel special inside being there. So it wasn't necessarily tied to a thing, but more of a place. So that was mine.
Yeah, it's hard not to talk about the organic artifacts that come from Herschel Island in the North Slope, as well as the ice patches, because elsewhere in the world, this type of preservation, where you get the sinew and you get the fletching, and you get kind of glimpses into the technology people and archaeologists, kind of think were used back then. With these organic artifacts, you really get, you kind of start connecting the dots of how people lived and hunted in the past. So, I think it is really interesting seeing these like slotted antler atlatl dart points and arrow points, and how people were using them and creating them, and different kind of almost creative aspects to these organic artifacts. Really neat, really cool, passionate about it. I like it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you guys. I actually have a question. I think a lot of people don't always know, like, what do archaeologists do in the winter when you're not in the field? Tell us a little bit about the glamour involved in that.
I think that's a big bulk of at least what we do in the winter. Is we are prepping for the next field season, which requires like lots of logistic, helicopter planning, lots of people planning and food planning. But we also do a lot of, all the developments that happen in the Yukon come through review for our office. So our, kind of the unglamorous part of what we do is we do a lot of computer-based reviews of developments going on in heritage management. From the desktop, and then sometimes going out in the field. So, in the Yukon, we can't really do archaeological work when there's snow covering the ground, which is a lot of the year. So it's mainly kind of computer-based work.
Yeah, and our office also does, like Michael mentioned, we do a lot of the development reviews, but we also do, we collect all the reports for any consultants doing work, which is the bulk of the work, the actual field work in the territory. We collect all those things throughout the winter as well, and they send us site forms, and like Chris and some of us sometimes do all the board and requests for that. So once the site is found, we get like official naming from the Yukon government, and then it gets sent back to them. We collect all their artifacts when they finish processing them, and we intake those into our collections. So there's a lot of background, and then we have to do all that work for our own sites that we find. We have to write up site reports and field reports of all the projects that we visited. So there's a lot of the unglamorous office work that happens that has to be part of your archaeology program, or else you're not properly recording things for the future. So there's a lot of that, and then a lot of meetings with some of the First Nations, other partners, to prep for all the other stuff as well. So there's a lot of meetings and a lot of office work. And sometimes playing with the collection as well.
That's right.
Unglamorous, but super important, right?
And it's normally enough work where a lot of the interpretation that a lot of these heritage sites deserve, we are so busy we don't necessarily get the time to do. So that's why it's really nice to have, outside research institutions and different groups like University of Kansas, the Bluefish Caves, University of Calgary, come and be able to put the time and resources into kind of building the interpretation and the knowledge of these important Yukon sites.
Yeah, and I actually got a question that follows up on that one that came in on Zoom, asking, now that the ground is frozen, we were talking about, and all the CRM archaeologists are moving indoors as well, have you heard of any cool finds coming out of any of the development sites? And if so, what are they?
Sure. We don't have a lot of their information yet in the reporting cycle. I think every year there's so many projects going on and consultants out there is doing work. Sometimes we get tidbits of, really interesting sites, that things we haven't seen before, or older sites. But I know there definitely have been some pretty interesting consultant and CRM finds this year. But we haven't seen the reports on them yet. So.
Yeah, like I know we did pop by. There was some work being done around Yukon. We did pop by one site, and there was a cool obsidian microblade core that we saw from one site. We won't give any other details about that, but we just saw it, and it was pretty rad to see, because I've never seen a microblade core made out of obsidian before in person, and it also didn't look fully used, so that was kind of cool. But we should have some consultants out on here at some point talking about their cool finds, because I feel like sometimes they get out for many more days than we do, because they're rushing around and they have larger crews. So it would maybe be neat one day to do, consultants to do a little from the field.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Holly. We should look into that for sure. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, we have a question from Donna. And she's asking a little bit more about our collaborative relationship working with First Nations and doing archaeology. So she asks, how are First Nation representatives chosen for site visits? But you can speak more broadly on that as well if you'd like.
It really depends on the project. It happens in a variety of different ways, as every community is a little bit different. If we know about things ahead of time, so for example, when we went up to Bluefish Caves and Chii Ch'à'an Cave and doing all the work that we do up in the Old Crow region, the First Nation there kind of does a call out. They'll do almost like a job advertisement, and if people are interested, so we do the same thing with our paleontology crew does work out there. They'll advertise for a boat operator and a paleontology field assistant. They'll advertise for an archaeology field assistant, and they give them it's this much time, this is much pay, or whatever. And sometimes the First Nation offers payment. Sometimes it's like part of the project. It just depends on what the work is. So sometimes it's advertised in the community. Sometimes there's someone that's already interested in doing the work and has reached out ahead of time. Because, for example, we do this research roundup in Old Crow. We talk about, we're looking for field assistants. And sometimes people will come up to us and say that they're interested. And then, that might follow through later on. So it depends on the project. Sometimes, in the First Nation, there'll be people that actually work there that just want to go. And so they'll be part of it. So it just depends on where you are and how long the project is. And if you know all the dates ahead of time and stuff. Sometimes programs have land guardians or different land resource staff. And that's part of their job, is to actually come out with us if we're doing a short-term project. We've had some actual heritage managers come out, and there's interest in what we do and how we do it. And so they just want to come out and join us for a day or two here and there. So it just depends.
Thanks, Holly. Got another question. This one came in from Zoom. And this is about collections. So they're asking, where is the long-term archive for all of the materials that are found?
Yeah, so currently all the artifacts are, the majority of the artifacts actually are housed in the Yukon government branch office here in our collections facility. And yeah, so at the end, if a consultant goes out and does the work, finds archaeology side, all their material will initially come to us for to catalog and take care of.
Yeah, and we're kind of we are the holding in trust for all Yukoners. Right. So if you're interested in seeing the collection, or you want to get a tour, we have a lot of school groups that come through, or just we have a group called Long Ago Yukon that often every year wants to come by and see all this year's cool finds, and so they'll set up a site or a site visit to our office, and we'll put together a little presentation for them. So if anyone's ever interested, like reaching out to us, the archaeology program, and coming by for a tour, it's part of showing the collection, because we don't necessarily have a full facility for that to be shown off at, like a full museum. Like we have certain things that are appropriate up at the Beringia Center, but it's not the full collection. So yeah, we are the repository for now.
Thanks, guys. Another question from Zoom. Martina is asking and saying thank you for the awesome presentation, first of all. And then they say, you spoke a lot about sites threatened by climate change. They'd be very interested to hear if and how geophysical methods can or were used for large-scale surveys to map and uncover the endangered sites.
Chris Thomas, our special projects archaeologist, has done a lot of that work. I know they've been using RTK and drones to kind of at the same point every year on these shorelines to photograph and get point clouds for the shorelines from year to year. In terms of other geophysical methods they're using, Chris may know more about that, but I think it's mainly just kind of using drones and measuring known points from year to year to measure the shoreline erosion at the sites. And they've even gone back to some historical photos of the area, and they're able to kind of look at the longer term shoreline loss, especially on the north coast. But even in more the northern Yukon and even down here, the effects of climate change and fluctuations in water are affecting a lot of sites, even around the lakes and stuff up here. So the main way that we've done it is, again, through drone footage and going out there and measuring the same points every year and trying to get at least an inventory of the sites that are susceptible to like melting permafrost or rising water levels.
Thanks, Michael. And Martina, if this is something you would like to talk about more with Chris or anyone else on our team who does this work, please just feel free to message the Beringia Center and we can help put you in contact with the right people. Another kind of question that you probably might get fairly often is, how difficult is it to travel to some of these remote locations? Because I know in the Yukon, like, we do have a lot more remote locations than maybe some of the other provinces would have. So you guys spend a lot of time doing logistics and planning that may not be as necessary when you can easily drive right up to the site and then drive home and sleep in your own bed, right? This is a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, we definitely spend a lot more time on field logistics than I think a lot of people do. But we are very fortunate that we can tap into certain funding allocations for certain projects, depending on what it is. But yeah, obviously, if we can drive, we'll drive there. Sometimes it might take 6 hours to drive to a certain spot and then 6 hours to get back to a place where you can actually sleep. So we do, sometimes we camp out, or sometimes we sleep in a truck or figure something out. One of the big issues we have up here the past few years has logistics of getting somewhere, but also sometimes our modes of transportation aren't coinciding with the weather, or forest fires, or different swells or storms that are happening on the coast. And so if you do have a helicopter, that's ideal, but then what if there's a storm or high winds? Then you can't take it out. Or if you have really bad visibility, we've had multiple times when we've tried to fly out to a site and there's just too much smoke, or there's just too much smog coming in an area, and then the helicopter pilot's like, I could drop you off, but I might not be able to pick you up at the end of the day. And so it's really a battle. Sometimes Chris and Lee went up to the North Coast this year and they had a week's worth of flight time, but they only were able to get out for 1 or 2 days, and then had to fly all the way back to Whitehorse. So sometimes it's really disappointing when that doesn't pan out, but then sometimes things really work out way easier. We've also kind of all learned a whole bunch of random skills by doing archaeology in the north. So then I taking a boat operator course because I don't think I would have necessarily known how to, operate all these different varieties of boats in different situations. Me and Ty have both taken our swiftwater rescue course because sometimes you're working near a fast-moving river and you might fall in. So there's we learn a whole bunch of really cool skills, and also learning how to set up bear fences, because we're often, if we are camping out for a week or two out in the middle of nowhere and don't have access to a helicopter potentially immediately, we bring a lot of like sat phones and inReach devices. We set up bear fences. We've all gotten our predator defense shotgun training in case we have to deal with things like that. So it is quite different, and you have get a whole host of skills in conjunction with your archaeology skills, which is kind of an interesting and neat thing to do in the north.
It's interesting you bring up bears, Holly, because there was someone on Facebook asking about, did you have any bear encounters, any close calls, or did the bears kind of stay at bay this year?
I don't think we had any wildlife encounters this year. I think that's because we did our bear training, like we did our bear spray training, and we did this extra predator defense training and shotgun training, which was like a 2-day course. And I always said that if you have the training, you won't encounter it. If you don't have the training, it's probably when you're going to encounter it. So it was really great. We didn't have any, and we tend to like to be quite loud in the field. And that's mostly because I'm a loud person, but then partially because I say that that's helping to keep us safe. So that's like just justifying my loudness. But it does help. The louder you are, it kind of deters them away. So yeah, I don't think we had any close encounters this year, which was quite great.
Yeah, that's good news.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up for the day, do either of you want to add anything? Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So
Thank you
much
for coming out. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was great. I think everyone really enjoyed it. And if we happen to miss any questions, please feel free to reach out to us or let us know. And before we go, I did want to let everyone know that there is a Long Ago Yukon talk coming up. So Holly mentioned Long Ago Yukon, which is a local archaeology organization here in Whitehorse, and they're hosting an archaeology talk on Saturday, November 11th at 1 p.m. And that talk is with Steph Helmhofer, a PhD candidate from the University of Alberta, who will be speaking about her research in a talk titled, "What is Old is New Again and Again and Again, Pseudo-Archaeology." So this is a fun topic. Pseudo-archaeology in North America, far-right conspirituality from the 1920s to the 2020s. So something different to check out. That'll be 1 p.m. Saturday, November 11th. And that is not on our Facebook page, but that is on the Long Ago Yukon Facebook page, which is easy to find if you search Long Ago Yukon. Maybe Claire might pop the link into the chat for everyone. And it will also be live at the Beringia Center Theater. So anyone who happens to be in Whitehorse is welcome to come to the theater and watch that talk live. So thank you everyone for joining us and for your great questions today. We got so many thank yous and positive feedback on the messages about your talk, Michael and Holly. So thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing from you again, maybe later this year or next year, and learning more about some of the sites. And of course, Bluefish Caves, we'll wait patiently to hear more about what the University of Kansas has found. And, hopefully we can have them on the Beringia Center Science Talks maybe in the new year as well. So thanks again, and everyone have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.